Image description. A slide reads Expanded Core Curriculum Considerations for Students Who Are Deafblind with Kaycee Bennett. Below are the logos for the Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, the National Intervener and Advocate Association, and Wisconsin RID.
Thanks everyone for being here for Expanded Core Curriculum Considerations for Students Who Are Deafblind as part of our Empowering Interveners training series. And welcome everyone who's interveners and anyone here who supports students who are deafblind, parents, interpreters, interveners, teachers, speech language pathologists, OTs, PTs, welcome all. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Kaycee Bennett.
Hello everyone. I'm going to share my screen. There we are. Okay, perfect. As Heidi said, we're going to be talking about expanded core curriculum considerations for students who are deafblind today, and we'll dive into what that means and what that looks like here in just a moment. I am Kaycee Bennett. I am a deafblind education consultant, and I served in the beginning of my career as a teacher for students who are deaf and hard of hearing. I worked in our our regional day school programs for a while, doing self-contained deaf education, teaching all subjects to a few different grade levels at the same time, that kind of fun thing we have. And then I moved into an itinerant role and started serving students who were deaf and hard of hearing itinerantly, traveling around. It was mainly students who were hard of hearing and mainstreamed in general education classes, and then students with complex access needs that were in like life skills classes. And I did that and serving infants as well for ECI. And then I got a student on my caseload who did not have eyes. Anophthalmia, no eyes. And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do with this student. I know how to make everything visual, and that has been my job for a long time. And I partnered with the Teacher for Students with Visual Impairments, the TSBVI. We shared an office, and so we had a lot of time to collaborate and talk. And she was like, I know how to make everything auditory, and this kid does not hear. And so we worked together. We called in our outreach folks from the Texas Deafblind Project. I'm in Texas, and learned a lot from them. And then I went back to school and got my master's in deafblind education, and just absolutely fell in love with it. And so I have been doing that ever since. I served as an itinerant teacher for students who are deafblind, which we have in Texas. And I did that for a couple of years and then moved into consulting. And so I have been consulting for 6 years now, and absolutely love it, and focus primarily on school-age children, and really love to focus on language development and tactile language development in deafblind kiddos. That's a little bit about me professionally. I would love to hear in the chat. I know this is an intervener session, but as Heidi listed out, I'm sure there are people from with other backgrounds that are here today. If you wouldn't mind, if you'll put in the chat what role that you are serving in, so I can kind of get a sense of who's here today and in what capacity that you work with students who are deafblind. All right, intervener. Oh, good. Teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, itinerant, perfect. Intervener. Program coordinator. Intervener. Interpreter consultant. Awesome. More interveners. A TSBVI. Perfect. A consultant for deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind. a consultant for visual impairment, DHH teacher supporting deafblind students, love it. A comms, awesome. Office associate, interpreter intervener, deafblind consultant, intervener and interpreter, intervener, TSBVI, ooh, an educational audiologist, welcome, intervener, school support specialist, parent, yay, welcome, intervener, director of outreach, case manager, awesome, intervener, assistant state superintendent, welcome, deafblind consultant and intervener trainer. Fabulous. Thank you all so much for taking the time to share in the chat. Everybody, real quick, go to the blue box that either says everyone or hosts and panelists. If yours says hosts and panelists, click it and change it to everyone, because I want everybody to be able to see the questions and comments you put in. So we're all on the same page when we address different questions and comments that come throughout this chat today. I want this to be very collaborative. I want your input and feedback and questions and comments and thoughts all throughout. So please, anything that you want to share or want us to talk about, please put that in the chat. I'll be checking it throughout the presentation today. So definitely do that. And then I shared a little bit about myself professionally. I'll share just a little bit about myself personally. I am a mom of a 5-year-old. He has complex medical needs, and we ADHD, really severe ADHD being part of that. So we're very busy around here, and been married to my husband for a little over 10 years. There's a picture on the left of the 3 of us in a park. The picture in the middle is of me and my husband in Wyoming in October. I got to go up for work to Wyoming and I brought him with me because it was his birthday. That's a picture of us hiking in Wyoming. It was absolutely stunning. And then the picture on the right are my dogs. I have 2 greyhounds. They are retired racers and they take their retirement very seriously. They sleep all day and snuggle with each other. They're very sweet and I love them very much. They're getting old now. 9 and 11, I think, are their ages. So we love them. They're part of the family for sure. Wish we could all be in a room together, spend time together, but hopefully sharing that makes us feel a little more connected. Okay, we're going to dive in. What is expanded core curriculum? What does that even mean? There's a definition on the screen that says concepts and skills that usually require specialized instruction to compensate for decreased opportunities for incidental learning. This is a definition from the TSBVI, Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired website on expanded core curriculum. So basically what it means is all of those things that kids with typical hearing and or vision obtain incidentally. It's not the reading and the writing and the math and the science and the social studies. Those are the core curriculum. It's the extra stuff. It's the stuff that kids learn from observing, from looking around, from watching their parents, from watching their friends, from watching their teachers. Those are the types of things that are considered expanded core curriculum and the things that we're going to be talking about today. So who has expanded core curricula, I guess. There is an expanded core curriculum for students who are blind or have low vision. I know you guys are not in Texas. I work in Texas. It's mandated in Texas. It's mandatory that all students who are blind or have low vision are evaluated in the ECC and supported through the ECC. I know that's not the case everywhere, but we do have this ECC that anyone can use to support their students who are blind or have low vision. And even if it's not mandated, we consider it best practice to use that to support our students. There's also an expanded core curriculum for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. I have found that a lot of people don't know that. And a lot of teachers of the deaf are like, what? There's this tool I could be using. We've got a couple of options to use, and we'll look at it later, but there's one out of Iowa that's very widely used throughout the United States. And we'll look more into that in a bit, but there is one for students who are deaf and hard of hearing. And then today I'm going to show you some ECC considerations, expanded core curriculum, that's what ECC stands for, considerations for students who are deaf-blind. And you might notice that the one for deaf-blind is the only one that says considerations after it, and there's a reason for that. The ECC for blind and low vision and for deaf and hard of hearing is peer-reviewed and research-based and like very thorough everything for both of those. The deaf-blind one, that's not the case. We just wrote some considerations. These are our thoughts of things that you should consider. So it is not the same level of research backing and thoroughness that you find in the blind and low vision and deaf and hard of hearing versions of ECC. These are just things to consider, which is why that word considerations is there. There may be additional things for your student. There may be some of these things that don't apply. They're just considerations, and they're written as questions, which you'll see in just a little bit, because that's how we want you to use them. We want you to just think about these questions and think, does this apply to my student? What should we be doing about that? And so that's something we'll look at in just a little while. Okay, before we dive into the deaf-blind one, I want to look at, we're not going to look through in depth all of the ECC stuff, but for VI and DHH, but I do want to look at what the areas are. So for VI or blind low vision, there are 9 areas of the ECC. Assistive technology, career education, compensatory skills, independent living skills, orientation and mobility, recreation and leisure, self-determination, sensory efficiency, and social interaction skills. So we've got those 9 areas, and those were found to be the 9 areas where students who are blind or have low vision were not necessarily learning the same information incidentally as their peers, and that they required some direct specialized instruction in these areas. Okay, so we'll look at the DHH one now. You'll see there's some overlap. And then there's some things that are very unique. One of the unique areas, number 1, audiology. But 2, career education. We just saw that one, right? So 3 is communication. 4 is family education. 5 is functional skills for educational success. 6, self-determination and advocacy. 7, social emotional skills. And 8, technology. So some of them are word for word the same, and some of them cover a lot of the same things, but may have some different terminology. But those are 8 areas. That's from the Iowa DHH ECC. And then here are the 7 considerations in the DB ECC, deaf-blind ECC. So many acronyms in the field of education, as you all have probably learned. Here's some more for you. So the 7 areas for consideration are using hearing for orientation and travel, self-determination and advocacy, stress management and the effects of stress, communication and language, planning for the future, concept development, and access. Now, these areas, these 7 areas for deaf-blind expanded core curriculum are not meant to stand alone. These are to be used in addition to the VI and DHH ECC. There's so many letters. The blind low vision expanded core and the deaf and hard of hearing expanded core. This is to be used in addition to that. Okay, so what we did is we looked at both VI and DHH and we thought, what's missing? What's additional needs that our students who are deaf-blind have in things that they may or may not be learning incidentally? Okay, so that's where these came from. It's not standalone, it's to be used in addition. Can't stress that enough. So we've got those 9 areas from VI, 8 areas from DHH, 7 areas from deafblind as consideration. It would be absolutely impossible for one person on the team to support all of these areas, much less simultaneously, but at all, really. It's a team effort to support all of these expanded core curricula. It's everybody has to be involved. Everybody. Not just the sensory team, even not just the TSBI, TDHH, comms. We're talking any related service that's involved: OT, PT, APE, speech. And then we've got intervener in a lot of cases, right? We have family who's serving. We have so many people involved. And even then, we can't cover all of them in one school year. We have to sit down as a team and prioritize, determine which ones are most important for right now. Let's make a plan, right? Which ones for now? Which ones for next year? Which ones for the year after that? Something we need to be continuously looking at and tweaking as the student changes, as the environment changes. There may be different areas to take priority for that student. And it's not one person's job. It may be somebody's job to be the lead in evaluating the need, but it's everybody's job to support these areas and to work together to determine who should support these areas, who has the expertise to be able to support in these different areas, or who can role release some expertise, who can teach someone else to effectively support in the areas listed. What I'd love to do as we go through the different areas today is hear from you guys in the chat how you feel like you in your role can support those areas, especially those of you who are working directly with students. How do you feel in your role that you could support in this area? What might that look like? If you have ideas, if you're already doing some different things with students in the areas we talk about today, please put those in the chat. We all learn from each other. I think that's the best way for everybody to really think about how to apply this information. So please feel free to share anything in the chat as we go. What I have on the screen now is the file path of how to find the expanded core curriculum considerations. They are free. They're linked in this PowerPoint for you, but I also just wanted to show you where to find them in case you're looking for them later and don't remember where your slides are from this presentation. You can go to the Texas Deafblind Project website, which is TX, like Texas, TX, deafblindproject.org. If you go to resources and then topical resources, the resources are broken out by section and the sections are alphabetized. And one of those sections is called Educational Considerations. And in there, you'll find this linked and you can direct download it straight from there. So if you've not visited the Texas Deafblind Project website before, especially this topical resources page, it there's so much information there, and it's all organized. And if you're looking for, I need evaluation resources, there's a whole section. They're alphabetized and ready to go for you. Some of the things are from Texas, some are not. So anyway, that's a little bit off topic, but check that out if you haven't explored that before. And that is where you can find this if you're looking for it again later or want to share it with somebody. Oh, Michelle shared in the chat. She's in North Carolina, and this year has been privileged to set up a standalone ECC class where deaf, blind, and blind students in the county come together to a central location. And as a VI team, they teach a class solely on ECC. Awesome. The students have their own section in the course catalog to register for the class. I love that, Michelle. I don't know if it's the same everywhere. In Texas, we call them innovative courses. And I really love when people get creative and think about how to serve students in these like creative ways to make sure that they get what they need and they still get credit, like elective credit. That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Ooh. Okay. We're going to jump into the first area, which is using hearing for orientation and travel. How many of you put me in the chat if you, as other than our one comms, if everybody else in the chat will put me in the chat if you have been on an O&M lesson? Ho, 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 that's a lot of me's. My goodness, that's like nearly everybody. Wow, that's awesome. Well, then I definitely want to hear from each one of you that said me as we go today about what you think about some of these areas. My goodness, sorry, when I move my mouse, it keeps moving it. Okay, and then somebody who has not yet but would love to. I love that too. Before we get into this, I'll share really quickly my experience with orientation mobility. I am not an orientation mobility specialist. As a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, I shared an office with the TSBVI I was talking about earlier. She was dual certified, and we worked in a small town. She served in both roles. And our district that we were working for at the time had this rule that if you were going off campus with a student, you had to have another adult with you. You can think whatever you want about the rule. People are always like wanting to talk to me about the rule. I didn't write the rule. That just was the rule. And she had worked it out with this particular student that we shared, had Usher syndrome. And she had worked it out with that student's mother, where the mom came on the lessons and met them there. And so it was no big deal. There was always an adult. The mom was fine to be the adult. And then one day, mom couldn't come. And it was kind of last minute. She had this awesome lesson set up and a bus booked to get them there and all these things planned, and mom had to cancel, and was okay with the daughter participating still, but mom wasn't going to be able to make it. And she came in, I was at my desk, and she said, is there any way you can move some things around today and come with me? You just be a warm body, just come so that I can do this lesson. I already have everything planned. And I was able to make it work. And so I said, yeah, no problem. We'll do that. So I go for this lesson, and I was like, oh my gosh, O&M's the coolest thing. They get to do all this super fun stuff and go off campus, and they're working on, while the O&M is like, thinks they're working on the O&M things, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're also working on all of this language development, concept development, all of these things that were like my wants for this student as the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. And I just got absolutely hooked on co-serving with the orientation mobility specialist. It's not what I'm here to talk about today, but I do present a lot about teachers of deaf and hard of hearing and O&M working together because I just think it's amazing and very beneficial for everybody. But that's where a lot of this came from today, is thinking about some of the things I learned in co-serving. I started co-serving with all of our deafblind students who had orientation and mobility services, and learned so much through that process. Just being able to like be in a grocery store with our students and you know, do all these awesome things that the orientation mobility specialist was working on. If you have experiences you want to share in the chat, please do. I'll start by reading some of the considerations that are here in this section. So the first one is, does the student demonstrate compensatory skills to support localization of environmental sounds and or intelligibility of speech and noise during travel? So within that, we're looking at, does the student have the skills to properly use an interpreter during O&M? I wonder if some of the me's in the chat were serving in that role at the time. If your student was working on street crossing and you're there as an interpreter, it's really incredibly important that we have a plan of where everybody's going to stand, right? On a street corner in traffic is not the time to figure out how we're utilizing the interpreter. Is the comms, is the interpreter doing this? Is the intervener doing this? Is the comms doing this? Who's doing what? Who's standing within an arm's reach of the student for safety? Like all these things, we have to work out ahead of time. Does the student know how to advocate for who they want to give them the information, if they have preference in that? So many components within that section. It has to have a plan. Other things like, does the student know how to use and ensure that the programming is appropriate for assistive listening devices in travel? Where this came from was that very first O&M lesson that I was on, the orientation mobility specialist is wearing the student's FM, it was an FM at the time, an FM or DM, now it's a DM system, microphone that the staff wears that directly linked into the student's cochlear implant. And the TSBVI is wearing it, and she is standing on a street corner asking the student if she can localize traffic sounds. And she's like so proud of herself that she's wearing this FM system. And I was like, hey, you know, you need to mute that if you're wanting her to hear the environmental sounds that are going around, because you're making yourself 5 decibels louder than what's coming in through her cochlear implant microphones. And she was like, what? I just thought I was supposed to wear this. I didn't know that there were like times I should wear it and times I shouldn't wear it, which was my bad as a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. Should have explained that more thoroughly. But it made me realize, like, I never thought about her wearing it on a street corner and what she would need to use that for. And so knowing that this student was a very proficient communicator, and this would be a great skill for her to have, to know when to use that, when not to use that. If she has different programs on their cochlear implants or hearing aids or Baha or whatever assistive listening device they're using, making sure they know which program to be in different situations for the best access. You're probably not going to be in the same program for street travel, street crossing travel, as you would in a lecture situation. You're going to need really different programming for that. So having the student know that information, and having the staff know that information if the student is not at a level of understanding yet to be able to do that on their own. Other things that fit under that is if the staff needs training for supporting the lack of motivating sound sources. So where that one comes from is in the serving the babies, serving in the ECI, early childhood intervention setting. A lot of times our orientation and mobility specialists are working on trying to get the baby to be motivated to move. a lot of times for our blind babies or babies with low vision, it may be making sounds, calling the baby over, playing with these fun sound toys, and trying to get the baby to reach out for them, to crawl to them, to roll to them, to try and find this source of fun, motivating sound. And for our students who are also deaf, they may not have that. And so it may be that the orientation mobility specialist might need to collaborate with somebody who with deafblind experience to talk through that, brainstorm. Okay, how could we get the student motivated to move if we don't have this sound source? So again, a consideration, a thing to think about. Does this apply for your student? Another thing under this first bullet here is just if the student experiences sound compression from their hearing aids, that can distort the proximity of traffic and other environmental sounds. So is that happening? And if you're not familiar with sound compression, for students who have better hearing in some frequencies than they do in others, sometimes the audiologist will compress the sound into the frequencies they have better access to, so that all sounds or most sounds come in that range of frequencies that they have better access to, which is great, so that they have access to sounds that they wouldn't necessarily have access to before. But it can distort some traffic sounds and other environmental sounds. You may not be able to tell like environmental sounds if that's like a big dog with a deep bark or like a little chihuahua. Like they may be compressed into the same frequencies. So it's important to know that we know what to expect from the students' hearing and their responses based on how their hearing aids are programmed or their cochlear implants are programmed. I guess more hearing aids, but okay. That was all under the first bullet. If anybody has questions or anything to add, please do. And the second bullet here is the student able to compensate for not being able to use sound shadows? So this could be something like a large obstacle. Students who are blind and traveling may be able to hear the difference if there's like a large semi truck parked between them and the traffic, and so they were hearing the traffic, and then they stepped and now there's a semi truck in front of them, and it may be a clue to them that there's a large obstacle ahead. And students who are deaf or hard of hearing may not have access to that information in the same way. So again, it's just something to consider, something for the orientation and mobility specialists to think about and wonder if they, need any other compensatory skills for that. They need any other information. Also under that one can be, does the student have a lack of access to sound cues? It may be that other students who are blind or have low vision are able to hear the water fountain and know, the motor on the water fountain and know that their classroom is the next door. Our students who are deaf or hard of hearing may not have access to that. How what other compensatory skills can we teach them? What can we use instead? It doesn't have to be necessarily a negative thing that they don't have access to that. It's just something we need to think about, something we need to be aware of, so that we know how to best support them and teach them to get around as independently as possible. And then the last one I have under this bullet is, does the student have the ability to or compensatory skills for orally cueing dog guides? It may be that they need, if they're going to be using a dog guide, it may be that they need a dog guide that knows some sign language. It may be that the student wants to orally cue the dog guide and they need some speech therapy support for that. And could be lots of different things. So something to consider if they, want to be a dog guide or guide dog user in the future, that we're planning for that and we're providing the supports that we need in order for that to be a successful situation. Okay, that was one. Does anybody have questions, thoughts about using hearing for orientation and travel? Okay, I'll move to 2. But if you're typing, feel free to still send it. We can come back. Okay, moving into the second section. Self-determination and advocacy. Obviously, self-determination and advocacy is something we're working on with students who are blind or have low vision, or deaf, hard of hearing. That's not a new concept here, right? Some of the areas we're thinking about here, though, are specific to students who are deafblind. And that's why this is a section in the deafblind considerations to be in addition, because some of the self-determination and advocacy components here are a little different for our students. So the first one, does the student understand their etiology? Are they able to explain the implications? And I wanted to point out that this may apply to the family. If it's not applicable to your student, if your student is not at a place to be able to explain their diagnosis, to explain how that impacts them, then this can be for the family and for the staff that's supporting the student, making sure that the student or the people there to support them have this understanding and awareness, and are able to explain it to new people that they're interacting with as needed. Does the student know who they are? Do they value who they are? Are they able to express that with other people? And that doesn't necessarily have to be with formal language. That can be for our students with more complex access needs. And it may look very different for each of your student, but making sure they have that like self-awareness and self-worth. Does this student understand how interpreting is different from support service provider or SSP or co-navigator services and intervener services? In Texas, there's been a big push toward co-navigator services for our adults who are more autonomous. And so we have much less SSP services in our state now, much more co-navigator services. Yeah, somebody asked to familiarize with those terms. Absolutely. So support service provider and co-navigator, they're very similar services. And they support deafblind individuals, typically deafblind adults, some teens, but typically adults who are deafblind. And they provide access to the environment to that individual in a way that allows them to continue to be totally autonomous. So they're not persuading decisions in any way. They're giving all of the information and then doing following the deafblind individual's lead. So the deafblind individual is leading the interaction, they're leading all the decision making, everything. And the SSP or co-navigator are there to provide the access. And then the intervener, many of you are more familiar with intervener services, can be more in a lead role and can assist in decision making and thinking about I'll give you an example. We had a deafblind community member who lived in Texas for a while. He's moved out of state now, but he always gave this example. It was before code navigators existed, but he gave this example of the difference between an intervener and an SSP. He said, if I went to a restaurant with an SSP and I said, it was breakfast time, and I said, what kind of pie do they have? And the SSP would say apple, pumpkin, pecan. And he would say pumpkin, they would tell him where it is, he would go get it, he would sit down, he would eat it, the end. The intervener, on the other hand, might say, it's breakfast, so maybe we should think about a more nutritious option for breakfast. They have, would you like me to read you the breakfast menu? And be able to do a little more intervention there, where the SSP is strictly providing the information. Code Navigator is in a very similar role to the SSP, except they are taking more of a secondary role to the individual who's deafblind. The individual who is deafblind is doing more leading and guiding. Any of that didn't make sense, feel free to put in the chat. And again, make sure your chat is set to everyone. There's some things that are coming through that not everybody can see, so make sure your chat is set to everyone. Okay, so under that umbrella there, does the student understand which of those services are needed in which settings? Can they request sign language accommodations as needed? Can they request an interpreter? Can they request accommodations to the sign language itself as needed, which we'll get more into that in the access section? Can the student explain how these services in schools might be different from the community services in the same name? And again, this may be the family and not the student, depending on the student. But thinking about interpreters and educational interpreters versus community interpreters, the different roles that they have, there's lots of things that can be different between those two situations depending on the student. Interveners is another example of things that are quite different, or can be quite different in the school setting versus in the home and community setting. In the school setting, they are likely taking direction from the classroom teacher and from the professionals that are coming in to support the classroom teacher. In the home and community setting, they're likely creating all their own activities and taking a more leadership role on that student's home and community team. So they may be different. Does the family, does the student understand those things, and are they prepared for that? The next one, does the student understand the isolating effects of being deafblind and how to become more included? So not necessarily that they feel isolated, but just the innate effects of not having full access to those distal senses. If there's individuals around them, they may not know that they're there, or they may not know who they are, and that can cause isolation. And so we want to make sure that they understand how to become included, that the staff around them know how to include them and provide them the information that they need in order to include themselves. And that goes for everybody serving our students. Does the student express a sense of self and a sense of others in the world? Are they able to access the people that are outside of their physical reach and have the ability to connect with them? Many of our students need to be directly taught to use distance communication, like texting or emailing, because if for our students who are more proficient communicators, because for a lot of our students, if the person is beyond the fingertips, they might as well be on the other side of the world. They don't have access to them, they don't have access to them, right? Whether you're in the same room and you just lose contact, or you're gone, it can feel the same for our students. And so we have to make sure that they have what they need, and that the staff around them know how to support that need, in order for them to have contact with people who are not directly within an arm's reach. Can the student self-advocate for access and explain their needs related to access? And again, that won't necessarily apply for every single student that you're supporting, but something to consider. Likely applies to some of the students that you may be supporting. This is a lengthy section, so I took up 2 slides on this one. And some of those access considerations could be, the interpreter, the SSP or CN, the technology, the website accessibility, captioning, can be lots and lots of things. Does this student and or family have the information they need to make connections with deafblind advocacy and groups or family organizations? And then related to that, also, do they have the information to make connections with deafblind resources and connections with other families? We know families learn from families, right? And our students need deafblind role models. And where you find those deafblind role models is in deafblind advocacy groups and family organizations. These resources that we have in your state, in our nation, around the world, really, and be able to connect everybody and make sure that they have the resources that they need. So again, things to consider and think about for your student. Not all groups, not all organizations are going to be appropriate for every family. So thinking about what is the best fit for this student and this family, and making sure that they have that information. Can the student advocate for and explain the need for appropriate programming for their hearing technology for use in different environments? We talked a little bit about this when we talked about travel, but this can also be your student may love to go to the movie theater, but their hearing aids are horrific for the movie theater. And so it may be that they need a movie theater program in their hearing aids. Do they know how to switch programs in their hearing aids? Sometimes that's a button on the hearing aid. Sometimes it's in their app on their phone, because things have changed so much. And now most of the time you can change programming in your phone. The mom, dad, whoever's with them can change the program with their phone. It's likely going to be quite a different program than they have for a lecture setting in a classroom, or that you're using for street travel or street crossing travel. So making sure that they understand that, or whoever is there to support them understands those things and is able to support the student in that. Can the student explain the need for visual and or environmental cues to be communicated in real time by their staff members? This is often provided by the intervener, right? The environmental information that's going on. Somebody walked in a room, it's this person. These people over here are laughing because of this situation that just happened. Letting them know what is going on around them. Not all students like the same amount of information. Not all students like the information presented in the same way. So knowing your students' preferences, and making sure that they can explain those things if they're proficient communicators and able to express that. If they're not proficient communicators and they're more emerging communicators or not using a lot of formal language, they probably still have strong preferences about how they receive this environmental information, but they're probably not going to be able to just tell you. So we're going to have to be detectives and figure out, do they like it better when I give them the tactile, information on their arm, on their back, on their leg? Do they like to know every little thing? Do they like to know just when we're coming and going, when we're going to be right back? What types of feedback do they like about the environment? You don't have to do that through formal language. That can be done in lots of different ways. And does the student have the visual or auditory access to know what the topic of conversation has shifted to? This one really refers to, this happens for blind and low vision students as well, but in the classroom, when teachers change topic and they just point at something and they say, okay, we're gonna talk about this. And then they start talking. And you're like, what is this? Our students are left wondering, what on earth are we talking about? It's like those people when you talk to them and they just start talking in the middle of a sentence and you're like, did I miss something? What are we talking about? And I think for our students, that happens quite often where we're using like visual reference, and we point to them, or we may make a facial expression and say like, oh my gosh, yeah, I felt like this. Make a face. And our students who are blind, low vision, or deafblind are like, you feel like what? You know, there's not that information from that visual reference. So if they don't, or it could be auditory too. Somebody could drop a book and then people are commenting about how loud it was, or how, you know, crazy that kid is, or whatever. And our student may be wondering, what are they talking about? What happened? What is the topic here? And so making sure that if they don't have the access to that information, being visual or auditory, that we're providing that to them. And again, that's often the intervener who is providing that in real time so that they can follow what's going on around them. Okay, any thoughts, things you thought of that aren't here for self-determination and advocacy, or ways that you have supported these things? Some of the items are more focused on proficient communicators, and some of them are more focused on emerging communicators. I'm curious, some of you put, when you put your role, but I'm curious, are most of you supporting students who you would consider more emerging in their communication, or more proficient? You can put an E or a P. More emerging or more proficient in their communication? Proficient being more using more formal language, more on or near grade level. Okay, lots of emerging. Both, okay, great. Emerging, proficient, emerging. Okay, lots of emerging. Lots of emerging. Okay. Perfect, that helps me. I can tailor my examples a little more toward emerging so that it can help you apply it to your students. Awesome, thank you for sharing that. Okay, number 3. This is a pretty unique header. We don't see this in either of the other ECCs that we talked about. Stress management and the effects of stress. While this applies to all of our students who are deafblind, I think it incredibly applies to our students who are emerging communicators, because they don't always have a way to clearly explain this information to those around them. Our first bullet here is, does this student and or family understand the effects of long-term stress or toxic stress on the body and nervous system, and how to recognize and prevent them? This is huge. It may be that the team, the family, needs training on toxic stress, on what it can look like and how to prevent it. That training, could be, you could reach out to your Deafblind Project for your state. There's also a lot of really great resources on Harvard's Center for the Developing Child website on toxic stress. And while it's not deafblind specific, it really directly applies to our students. They talk a lot about if our students make communicative attempts and we miss them, what that does to the body, to the nervous system, that it really sends them into distress. And then if you are in a prolonged state of distress or frequently in distress, what that does to the body. They have, medical information. Yes, Rose, I'll put that website in there at the end. I'll grab it for you. There's information about living in a state of distress for long periods of time, what they call toxic stress, can cause cancer, can cause diabetes, can cause all these mental health issues, cause all these physical problems for children and adults who are living in this state. Of course, Harvard Center on the Developing Child is not focused on our students with sensory disabilities in particular, but it's their videos are really easy to understand, and I think it's pretty easy to reflect on the information they share and how it could be applied for our students who are deafblind. We know that sometimes the communicative attempts from our students who are emerging communicators have really low readability, right? They're hard to understand. They're hard for us to see and know, oh, that's what they mean. That's what they're talking about. We call that low readability. And we can inadvertently cause stress by that, right? They're trying and trying and trying to reach out, and we have no idea that they're trying to reach out, or we know they're trying to reach out, but we're not sure about what. That can cause distress, and we see what a lot of times we hear called behavior from our students because of this, when we know really the behavior means that they are in distress, and that's an us problem and not a them problem. So we have to figure out why they're in distress and how to resolve that so that they're not living in this constant state. So it may be that staff need training, and that's something that you can reach out and get, and something to consider, and make sure that everybody knows what to look for, and how we can make sure that that doesn't happen to our students. We want to know if the student can advocate for their needs in regard and one more time, can the student advocate for their needs with regard to feelings of isolation? And that is obviously, with the student being the advocate here, is a little more on the proficient communicator side, but could also be that is the intervener being able to advocate for the student, or the parent being able to advocate for the student. It can fit whatever need that you have for this, but making sure that the student isn't feeling isolated. So does the student have a stress management strategy? And this one, I think it's important to point out that our students probably have a stress management strategy. We just might not know that that's what it is. And it might not be something that we love. It could be self-injurious behavior. It could be that they injure others. It could be that they totally shut down. It isn't always a positive stress management strategy, but it's helpful for us to know what stress management strategy they're using. That way, if we know that that's what it's being used for, we can shape that into a safer stress management strategy. Now, if they have a stress management strategy that is a little unique, looks a little different, but it's not hurting anybody, then that's totally fine. We don't have to shape that. We can leave that. It's totally fine for them to do things that are different than everybody else. We just want to make sure that they're safe and that everyone around them is safe. So it may be that, we need some chats about you know, what these actions that they're doing could be, and it could be that they're trying to manage their own stress. A lot of what we do is detective work, and trying to figure out what on earth could that be? What is that? What does that mean? What is that for? What's the function here? Why? Why are they doing that? Have you seen that before? What does that look like? So many things that we wonder in working with our students who are deafblind, especially those who have emerging language. And this is no different in the stress management category. Another consideration here is what implications may apply related to their specific etiology. Couple etiologies come to mind in that we know that a lot of our students with charge syndrome have fairly significant dysregulation, that they're having issues with proprioception, in addition to the hearing and vision a lot of times. That can cause a lot of stress. They may behave in unique ways. And knowing about charge syndrome can really support reducing stress. So it may be that some training is needed on those specific etiologies. Another one that comes to mind for more proficient communicators typically is Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome can be a very big stressor for our students, especially if they find out later in their preteen and teen years that they have Usher syndrome. They may learn that they are losing their vision and they're already deaf, and it can cause a lot of stress in a time where they are dealing with middle school and high school stress and hormones and emotions, and it can be a really tough thing. I actually served a lot of students with Usher syndrome in my previous role, and it's a difficult thing to support those students through that stress. Making sure that you have connections to the counseling services, to the Usher Syndrome Coalition, that to adults with Usher syndrome to be role models and connect with. There's so many different things that we can do, and provide training on those areas from those experts who are living with Usher syndrome and have experienced that themselves. Does the student demonstrate the self-awareness to explain stressors related to their disability? And this could be a great place for counseling, you know, considering if that may be helpful for your student. And for our students who are more proficient communicators, being able to explain, hey, that really stresses me out when you do that. Like, I would like to not participate in that part of that, or could you not, you know, tap me in that way for my attention? I'd prefer if you would touch my elbow, or whatever it may be for our students who are able to share using more formal language. Okay, that's stress management and the effects of stress. Anything to add? Feel free, throw it in the chat. Okay, we're going to move on. Communication and language. Feel free to, if you're typing, feel free to share it all the way through. Okay, communication and language. How does the student use their tactile bodily sense within communication and conversation? Tactile bodily sense, tactile bodily communication is something I love to talk about. If you've not seen that term before, our friends in the Nordic countries say bodily tactile. We tend to say tactile bodily. It's the same thing. You see that. What we're talking about here, and the reason that we don't just write the word tactile, is because what does everybody think of when they hear the word tactile? Throw in the chat. It's the first thing that pops in your head. Tactile. Braille. Touch. Hands. Yes, Aaron. Yep. Jeannie. Yep. Hands. Touch is good. I like touch. The hands. So many people think hand specific, feeling something, Most people think hands. Some people think even as specific as fingertips. Okay. Our deafblind students, they just use their hands and their fingertips to get information and communicate? No way, right? They're using their whole body, entire body, top to bottom. Yeah, oral, a lot of times they're very oral. Check out things with their mouths. There's so many receptors on the tongue and on the lips. You can get so much great information by bringing things to your mouth. And we see that a lot. We also see a lot staff say, how do I get them? Stop putting stuff in their mouth. Anybody want to guess what the response is to that? Don't. Don't stop it. Yeah, how many of you have had, you don't. Thank you, Danny. How many of you have had students who gather so much information with their feet, their toes and their feet? I've had so many deafblind students that get so much information from their feet. I see your stress question. I'm gonna come back to it in just a minute. So that is why we have moved to using the term tactile bodily and not just tactile, because I don't want people to read tactile and think I'm talking about the hands or the fingertips. I am talking about the hands and fingertips, but I'm also talking about every other body part that child has, because they could be using any part of their body to gather information and to communicate and to learn. And so that's why I have a publication out. I'll show you a picture of it in a little bit. It's all through that as well, tactile bodily. So anyway, wanted to go through that really quickly. And that can be exploring. That doesn't have to be tactile language. I'm not necessarily talking about tactile sign language or pro-tactile. It can also just be the innate language that lives inside of our students who are congenitally deafblind. That can be tactile bodily language, which is not what I'm here to get super in depth with today, but also something I love to talk about. So that's a piece of it. How is formal speech developed and modeled without the full sense of vision and hearing? So if you have students who are working on learning to speak, to formal speech, a lot of times that is done with the SLP is saying, okay, we're gonna put our teeth here, we're gonna put our tongue here, all of these very visual cues of how to produce speech. So if our students don't have the functional vision necessary for that, what compensatory skills can we use? It may be that they need some tactile form of that. A lot of times it's not going to naturally occur to the speech pathologist that they may need to like let the student have their hands in the pathologist's mouth. Not everybody is as comfortable with touch as us in the deafblind field. And so it may be something that needs to be considered and talked about of how is that going to look? How can we support that? What accommodations does the student need to access sign language? If you've got a student using manual language of any kind, they may need modifications to the rate of the sign, how fast or slow it's produced, to the location. They may need a reduced signing space, so that if you're signing like man with your thumb to your forehead and then your thumb to your chest, if you're signing man and they have a 10-degree visual field, by the time they find the hand on your forehead, you've already moved to your chest and they have no idea what you just signed. And so they may need a reduced sign space so that they have access to everything that you're signing. They may need hand tracking on that same kind of note. If you're not familiar with hand tracking, that's where the student places their hands on the signer's wrist so that they know where to focus their attention, their visual attention. So they're still obtaining the sign visually, but their hands on the signer's wrist are giving them the information they need of where to focus that visual attention. Yes, Jay added how much sign given at any given time. They may need that rate to be much slower. It just depends on the student. Are accommodations needed for touch cues, for facial expressions? You know, if they're using ASL, facial expressions and facial grammar are a huge piece of that. And we may need to provide that manually, those manual markers. Very rarely, but occasionally, we still see individuals using what's called Tadoma, which is where they place their fingers and thumb on the speaker's lips and jawline, and they're essentially tactily speech reading or lip reading. We do not see that very often, but it's in here as a consideration. Do they need any accommodations for that if that is a mode of communication that's been chosen for that student? A way to determine all of these things that I just talked about is we have a free tool on our website called the ADAM-LS. I should have written out what that stands for because I can never remember. Assessment of deafblind access to manual language systems. I got it. And it's basically what accommodations need to be made due to the student's vision for them to access manual language systems like sign language. Okay, so we have that free tool, walks through all of those. So those are all questions related to that. How does the student demonstrate the use of non-formal expressions of language? So all of you who said E earlier, oh, this is for you. How is the student using gestures? How are they using bodily emotional traces? Bets. If bodily emotional traces is not a familiar term to you, it is where when there is an emotional situation that the body actually remembers how it was placed, what it felt like, the movement, the pressure that was associated with that, and the body can produce that at another time when they're feeling that same way. So it could be that it can be a positive or a negative emotional situation. It could be that, well, here's an example that that I lived last year. A student hit their head on a doorknob and hurt really bad, and it was a very upsetting situation, and they covered their head and they screamed, and then later they got upset, and so they covered their head and they screamed in the exact same way that they did when they hurt themselves. And so it could be that that is the body expressing that trace or that physical body memory. So that's a bodily emotional trace. So how's the student using gestures, bodily emotional traces, that tactile bodily language that we talked about? Does the staff need training on recognizing those forms of language and knowing how to respond to them in a way that will make sense to the student? Does the student's visual abilities meet their need for speech reading? We talked about that a little bit. Not all will need this, obviously, but some might. Does the student need an alternate to the phonetic approach to Braille? Do they need an alternate to learning literacy phonetically? They may need a visual or a tactile form of phonics. Things to consider. Does the student need to use uncontracted Braille longer? Is English their first language? And if not, what supports might they need in order to access English? Learning a new language is really challenging as it is. If you don't have full access to it, it's obviously going to be a lot more challenging. So what supports might need to be in place for that? Planning for the future is the next section. Have the student and family developed a person-centered plan? Do they need help with that? Do they need training in that? Someone to guide them through that process? And where are those resources? Does the student have the pre-work skills that they need? That can be things like, are they able to follow directions? Do they have work awareness, knowing what jobs exist? Do they need support in developing their soft skills? How are the services in schools different from community services? We talked a little bit about that earlier. And in the planning for the future part of this, it can be, how do those services work in employment settings? How do they work in higher ed settings if you have a college-bound student? Does the family know how to obtain services once they're out of school? Can look really different. Do they know what services are available, who to contact, how to get those things? You'll find, because this was published in Texas, when you're looking at the full version of the document, it has some Texas-specific things like the Deafblind Multiple Disabilities Medicaid waiver and Texas Workforce Commission, but apply whatever is applicable to you in your state and what resources are available for your students and families. Has the student participated in experiential job exploration? Do they need hands-on experiences in different jobs prior to entering the workforce to know what they're interested in? They may not know or have the background information to be able to apply information about different job options and think about if they would like that. They may need to actually have hands-on time with that. 6 is concept development. Is the student able to access environmental information that gives context and meaning? Do they need this information to be given tactily? And this may be through some protactile, like a hand on the shoulder, meaning somebody's attending to them. Can be something formalized like protactile, or could be something student specific that you're using. How's the student filling in concept gaps? Do they need intensive direct instruction for this? It may be that they need dedicated time to work on filling in those concept gaps. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but how does the student learn concepts beyond an arm's reach? We talked about interacting with people beyond an arm's reach, but what about world concepts that they can't touch? They may need intensive direct instruction for this, or it may be determined that some of those things aren't a priority. It's things to consider. Does the student require the use of concrete objects and/or full-scale models for the instruction? Do they need those real objects in order to make the connection with the content? Does the student require description and direct instruction in order to participate or be an active spectator of games, sports, and social aspects to these events? And this can include tactile input or just further explanation. I always think about that video that went viral several years ago of that, you guys may have seen it, the young man who was a big soccer fan, and his family built him like a tactile model of the soccer. I'm so bad with soccer. If y'all are soccer fans, you're going to be horrified by everything, my terminology here, but the soccer field, and they like move the ball around in real time, like the sighted friends are watching and moving the ball around, and he's tactily exploring it, and he's cheering in real time as they're scoring goals or making good plays. There's also one where they give the information on the back. I saw one recently of a dad watching his little 5-year-old playing sports, and the mom is giving him all the information on the back of where the ball is, where the kid is, how he's doing, and he's cheering in real time. So it doesn't always have to be things happening in the classroom. Rec and leisure is also really important, and sports can certainly be a part of that. If you haven't seen those videos, go to YouTube. I bet you can find them. They're really, really cool. Okay, and the last section, I know we're running out of time here. The last section is access. Looking at it, the student has strategies and accommodations to address the combined effects of their sensory losses and those implications. If they're using hand under hand, which is really more a question about staff, and if the staff needs training in this strategy, sometimes that you're, they just pull away, they don't like it. It's not that they don't like it, it's just that they haven't learned that they're safe yet, and they're afraid their hands will be controlled. And so things like that, things like providing support to staff. Is the student using tactile cues, and what cues might be unique to this student? Does the staff need training in knowing which tactile cues mean what for each student? Does the student have tactile components within their calendar system and use them appropriately? Is the student's calendar accessible to them, and do they know how to use it? Again, a lot of these are more staff questions than student questions, but still important considerations. Does the student know how to properly use their technology? So many of our deafblind students are using like mass amounts of technology, especially those who are proficient communicators and are in more gen ed settings. They have vision tech, they have hearing tech, they have general tech that everybody has. They have so much tech. Do they have a plan to maintain it and transport it and know when to use which piece and who to ask to help each piece when it breaks and all of those things? Is the text-to-speech feature accessible to the student? This is a big need that I see with my deaf and hard of hearing background. TSBI's, will think JAWS, for example, is a good option for a student. And I'm like, oh, they're not going to be able to understand that JAWS speech with the hearing program that they have to have. So some kids can, some kids can't. It's important to look at your specific student. Is captioning accessible to the student? Do they need enlarged captioning? Does the student need direct instruction in how to use interpreters over distance technology? It's different than a live interpreter in person. Our wonderful interpreter team that we have here today is over distance technology. And if you are an individual with low vision, it may be a challenge for you, or it may be easier for you if you're able to have a big enough screen and bring them as close as you need them to. So it can be different for each of our students, but making sure we understand the needs. Does the student understand the proper use of additional channels that are programmed in the hearing technology for different environments? We've talked a bit about this throughout. Is the student targeting the further development in their strength in tactile cognition? This is something I could talk about all day. I know I'm almost out of time. I'm not going to stay on it a long time. But we know that our students who are deafblind in general are far more advanced in their tactile skills than those of us who are hearing and sighted. We know that. And we don't want to hold them back. We want to make sure that they are able to continue to advance even though they are light years ahead of us, right? And so do they need support in that? How are we supporting the fact that they have this amazing strength that we don't have? And how are we coaching them to become even better, even though they're further along than we are? Okay. Do they need to develop compensatory strategies due to their visual impairment, due to their hearing impairment? Like I mentioned in the beginning when I was talking about my personal experience, a lot of times what we would do to compensate for one is not going to work because of the impairment in the other. And so we really have to work together to look holistically at the student and make sure that those compensatory strategies make sense for that specific student. Does the student know how other conversations happen around them? Do they need modeling of social interactions or conversations tactily, like eavesdropping? If you think of students who are tactile communicators, do they know other people communicate? Do they think they're the only one that gets like talked to, interacted with? Do they know? Even if they're not formal language users, think about how you could use tactile eavesdropping, putting hands on other people's hands, learning that the intervener and the teacher talk to each other. Do they know that? Things to think about. Do they need that, what we were just talking about, for one-on-one and group conversations? Do they know people greet each other? Do they know groups can have conversations at the same time? You can have a conversation with more than one person at a time. Do they know that? They may have only interacted with one person at a time their whole lives. Do they know who's around them and how to gather this information? Oftentimes that's the intervener providing, guiding them to the people in the room so that they can check out who's there and greet them. Can they appropriately get the attention of other people? Appropriately being a key word there. A lot of times that's can be something that's also considered behavior, right? They want attention and they don't know how to ask for that. And sometimes we have to directly teach those skills. Okay, the resources that I have in your links. I have the Iowa Expanded Core Curriculum for students who are deaf and hard of hearing that I mentioned earlier. There are 8 areas, and expanded pieces within that are there. This document that I just walked you through, the expanded core curriculum considerations for students who are deafblind, is linked next. The expanded core curriculum information from Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired is there. That is a website that goes through the VI, ECC, and has some resources. The Texas Deafblind Project website that I mentioned earlier, and then the TSBVI store is there. And the reason that the store is there is because this document that I just walked you through was created initially as a part of the publication Essential Tools of the Trade for Teachers of Students Who Are Deafblind, which is a guide for completing evaluations. It looks at the FEE, LMA, communication evaluation, tactile bodily evaluation, and expanded core curriculum evaluation for students who are deafblind. It came out a couple of years ago. We're doing actually a large rewrite on it right now just to get it updated as we've learned from new information, and that will be coming out pretty soon for purchase, I would assume by the start of next year. So we'll have that at the tsbvi.edu/store. And my email address is on the screen. If you have any questions, Bennett, K, BENNETT, K, at TSBVI, like Texas School for the Blind, Visually Impaired, tsbvi.edu. And then that the feedback survey. Heidi, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so Jen dropped in there the post survey. So first of all, thank you so much for Kaycee. There were so many things that you were saying that I was like, tick, tick, tick. The first time that I went on an orientation and mobility route with a student who was deafblind, and most people were like, oh, his hearing is mild to moderate, but he was totally blind. And he stood on the corner for probably 4 different passes of traffic. And finally, he just said, forget it. And he just stepped out. So I'm like hyperventilating in a bag because he just wants to go just get across the street. There was a leaf blower kitty corner from where we were on top of it. And that was probably the first time that it dawned on me really the importance of localizing sound. Like that's life or death, needing to localize. Mine was just, I couldn't tell you where the telephone was ringing from. Like that's not life or death. Like orientation and mobility was a whole new ball of wax. So yes, thank you.
Amazing. They are amazing. And I forgot to go back to that stress question, like in 30 seconds. Somebody asked, how do we address the student stress with teachers that are getting hit and then giving consequences without looking at their own behavior causing the stress? That question came in a little bit ago. And I think it's really, really important to provide training on students who are deafblind, on access, on stress and distress. We actually have a tool on the Texas Deafblind Project website called Guidance for Planning Behavior Intervention for Students Who Are Deafblind, and it's free. And it's all about how all of their physical and safety needs have to be met before anything. And that can be a really helpful tool. Reach out to your Deafblind Project for your state and get some training on that. You can always email me if you need resources or can't find what I was sharing about, and I'm happy to help you.
Stress is huge. It's huge. I remember Dr. Van Dyke talking about that too in some of the research they had done around stress and its impact on kids. And he talked about how the kids also learn to weaponize themselves. That the spitting, the hitting, the kicking, and the biting, yes, can be stress related, but it's stress related because there's a demand being put on them, but they don't know what that demand is going to be. So I'm going to keep you away from putting a demand on me by doing these things because it keeps people out of my space.
They won't control my hands anymore. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So there's always a reason behind those behaviors, and it's important to try to figure out what they are. And it is not necessarily a behavior intervention plan. So Again, thank you so much, Kaycee, for taking the time to spend with us tonight. Jen has the post survey. Jen, I think, is also going to put in the link for the RID CEUs and or certificate of participation. If you weren't here at the beginning, you don't have to register for both CEUs and certificate of participation unless you want both. You can register for one or the other. It is the very same link. And if you can be patient, and it can be about, I would say, 3 to 4 weeks with the holiday coming up, before you get confirmation of the CEUs and or the participation. So I think we are at 7:33. So we're going to let people go. And again, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be here again the second week in January, and I believe that is also with Kaycee. So
you guys,
oh, go
somebody
ahead.
asked in the chat how they can access the slides. Do you guys send those out, or?
We can, with your permission, absolutely.
Sure, absolutely, sure away.
And I thought we did. I thought we sent them out, the materials, along with the link. But if you did not get a copy of the slides and you would like them, please feel free to use. You should have gotten an email from Jennifer Hudson Stanek to join us tonight. So feel free to reach out to Jenny, and she can send those to you. All right, everybody have a great night, and we'll see you all after the holiday. Good night.
Good night, thanks everybody.
The WDBTAP logo is displayed and reads WESP DHH, Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, WDBTAP. The logo and disclaimer for the ideas that work is displayed and reads. The contents of this presentation were developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education H326T230035. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.